I was absolutely terrified of becoming a mum, absolutely petrified. I thought, how am I supposed to stop my children from experiencing what I've experienced? I was particularly scared. I know looking back, the fear was coming from my own experience, but I was particularly worried about having a girl. So I was really hopeful for boys, which I have 2 boys, but it very quickly became apparent that that didn't really matter. And I think the risk was still just as significant.
Welcome to Conversations with Kristi. I'm Kristi McVie, a former WA police officer, specialist child interviewer and child abuse detective. For years, I worked on the front lines investigating child sexual abuse, where I saw the risks, the patterns, and most importantly, the ways that we can protect our kids. Now I'm here to share that knowledge with you. This podcast is all about real conversations, giving parents, carers, and educators the tools to keep their kids safe, both in person and online. Through survivor stories, expert insights, and practical advice, we'll navigate these tough topics together so you feel informed, confident, and empowered. Because when we know better, we can do better, and our kids deserve nothing less. Content warning. Some topics and conversations can be triggering for some listeners. Listener discretion is advised as your mental health is important. Please refer to my website and the show notes for available support services. Hello and welcome back to Conversations with Kristi, a podcast all about child abuse prevention and education for parents and carers, just so that we can talk about the real topics that we need to talk about. I'm with the amazing Danielle Cheeseman, who contacted me after I sent out a who wants to be on my podcast, and Danielle has a story which I think every parent can appreciate and will get a lot from. Always with these podcasts, just be mindful when listening that obviously we're talking about topics that are, that can be triggering. So there is a content warning that we'll be talking about child sexual abuse with all of my podcasts. That's pretty much the theme here. So just be mindful if this podcast is triggering, there'll be some support services at the end of this. So Danielle, I'm really grateful for you for just reaching out, because when I read your application about coming onto the podcast, and I was like, wow, this is something we haven't talked about on this podcast yet, is that, and I don't want to ruin it. So I'm going to get you to explain. I could just blurt it all out there, but I'm going to get you to explain exactly why you want to be on. You wanted to share your story for one, and the fact that you have such an interesting story, and I'll get you to share that.
Yeah, sure. So, I guess the first part to add is that I myself was a victim of child sexual abuse from a very young age until roughly around 12 when I finally come forward with that. I was fortunate enough to get quite a good support network around me, therapy, the things I need to be able to process and move through that. Not that it doesn't still give me challenges day to day, but I would consider myself fairly far along in my sort of healing process and acceptance of what has happened. So then fast forward, I guess, to becoming a parent. I was absolutely terrified of becoming a mum, absolutely petrified. I thought, how am I supposed to stop my children from experiencing what I've experienced? I was particularly scared. I know looking back, that actually this is probably not. The fear was coming from my own experience, but I was particularly worried about having a girl. So I was really hopeful for boys, which I have 2 boys, but it very quickly became apparent that that didn't really matter. And I think the risk was still just as significant. So I guess had to figure out how I was going to manage that as a parent, with other family members, with sleepovers, with school, with even just babysitting in general. I tended to not let my kids be babysat. I don't think I ever had them babysat by a stranger other than very immediate family, and even then it was quite limited. I just didn't feel like I was willing to trust anyone or anyone that may be able to access them, if they were visitors, etc. That really became evident for me when I had a situation not so long ago where someone known closely to me was charged with child sexual abuse offences. I had put in a lot of protective measures to keep my kids safe because I had some concerns around their behaviour, but also historical behaviours as well, that led me to think I'd rather just better be safe than sorry, I suppose.
Yep.
So when this then did come to light, it was a moment of, I mean, it was obviously devastating for everybody, but it was a moment of me going, I'm not crazy. I'm so glad
Yeah.
that I did what I did. My children, very fortunately, were not harmed throughout this process, and I can live in peace now knowing that I wasn't being over the top, I suppose, because
Yeah.
that's how I felt quite a lot of the time. Yeah, so it's been an interesting last 12 months, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's quite recent then, if that's, you know, like the fact that
Mm,
this person who was obviously close to your family and, you know, involved with your family in some way, shape or form, you know, if it's only been 12 months, you've been processing this, that's quite close
mm,
and recent. Whereas a lot of people, you know, I speak to, yes, their personal history is like years before, but also their current, you know, what they know has happened years before as well. So
mm,
yeah, that's crazy. And you pointed out there that, you know, it brought up a lot of things like becoming a parent was like terrifying because you're thinking, how do I protect my kids when I was not protected as a child for whatever reason? And also, you know what the risks are. Like, you know that this happens to and can happen to anyone. So, you know, it can be quite terrifying. Just going back to, you know, you as a child with regards to your own abuse, and please just only talk about what you feel comfortable talking about. You know, was this someone close to your family, the person who
mm.
abused you?
Yeah, yeah. So it was actually a parent in my situation. So I guess as close as they could possibly
They
get
can
in
get.
that scenario. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Mm,
And so, you know, that's a really difficult situation to be in because this is someone who's you're meant to be able to trust, you're meant to be able to feel safe with, and then that,
yeah.
and it's sad, you know, like I as a detective and as a child interviewer, you know, I was investigating the cases much like yours, I'd imagine, and
Mm,
you know that when it's someone that close to you, you know, you love them still, even though that they've been hurting you and harming you and doing what they're doing. You still love them. And it's not until you become an adult that you go, wow, that was like, it's, you know, was that your experience?
it was initially throughout, I guess, before I actually came forward. Once I came forward, I feel like I was 12 at that point. I had a little bit more maturity about me. I understood that it was wrong. And although part of the experience reporting wasn't necessarily a positive one, the
Mm,
supports that I did receive after were quite, I would say, what would be the word, supportive and reinforcing that, this is not normal behavior. This is not a healthy relationship. So I, I didn't hang on to that relationship
that's good.
too much, which is helpful. I was able to make
Yeah.
a bit of a disconnect to be able to move on. But certainly over the years while it was actually happening,
Mm,
I was so conflicted because I'd be telling my other family member that I didn't want to go there over the weekend and I just didn't like it, and he favors the boys. That was all of my excuses at the time. And I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to be around him or be with him as I
mm,
was older. But prior to that, I just thought it was a normal thing. It was like, I'm your dad. I love you. This is
yeah.
this is okay. I'm allowed to do this. That kind of attitude. So yeah, it was an interesting one. And I still do occasionally reflect back, and this is as morbid as this sounds, we've gone through the what if he was to die situation. How would you
Yes.
feel? And I'm like, relief. But would I? Because there
Yeah.
was something I missed. I missed out on so much because of what
Yeah.
he did. So I've
Yes.
been grieving that, not him necessarily, but what I didn't get to experience.
Yeah. The loss of a safe parent. The loss
Yeah.
of a relationship with a healthy relationship with your parent. Yeah, I can
Mm,
relate to that totally. And you're right, like you were trying to tell people around you with the fact that you didn't want to go there that something was happening because you didn't have the
yeah.
confidence to say something was happening until you obviously got to a point that you said something. And that's
Yeah.
something that I saw a lot of in interviewing kids, but also talking to adults after the fact, after they've realized their children are being abused. They're like, I just didn't realize that this is why they didn't want to go there, or I didn't know,
Yeah.
I couldn't work it out. And behavior is a form of language. I've said this time and time again. So you were trying to tell people with your behavior, I'd imagine.
Yeah. And I was probably very much of a quiet, people pleasing type of child.
Mm-hmm.
So I was not someone that was really loud or getting myself into too much trouble till later.
Yep.
But over that period, so I would say I'd probably be a little bit more withdrawn,
Yeah.
if in hindsight. And interestingly as well, I actually did disclose that this was happening to somebody before it actually came out. And I didn't remember this until only a few years ago, but I had discussed it with my nana, which is the perpetrator's mother. And at the time, she didn't know what to do with it. I guess she had her own experiences from childhood, and her automatic response was, you need to go and tell someone else. Like, I don't know what to do with this information. And I don't recall how long it was. It may have been a year or so before I actually did tell somebody that was able to then immediately put it into action.
Wow. Like,
But that was a really tough moment, I think, where I was like, if I tell people, they're not going to believe me, or not, or they love this person, they're not going to want to hurt them. So
yeah.
I think that wasn't very helpful. And I understand where it come from her
Yeah.
perspective and her generation. It's a very different time. So I have some I guess empathy for that situation.
Yeah.
But I also have a lot of anger, because I'm like, you could have actually stopped this sooner. Like, why didn't you tell somebody? Or, you didn't have to go to the police. You could have gone to my other family member and let them know so they could
Mm,
action it. So that's been, yeah,
yeah.
that was challenging, I think, especially when she confronted that with me later on in life as an
When
adult.
she told you that, oh yeah, I knew about it.
Yeah. And then it come flooding back, and I was like, wow, I remember this now. Like, I'd
Yeah.
obviously blocked it out. So
Yep.
yeah, that
Yep.
was challenging.
And you obviously felt safe to go to her and talk to her about it because maybe there was this connection there but she actually damaged that connection with you by
Yeah,
not doing anything
absolutely.
and not confronting or not sharing it with your other parent and stuff like that. So that's
Mm,
really interesting. And that's what I have heard a lot of in the past. If you hadn't have had if you hadn't have felt safe a year later to disclose to someone else, then it could have went on for much longer. It's only through
yeah.
the fact that you had to go and speak up again. And here's like, I don't know if you've ever heard me talk about this, but 1 in 3 adults believe children. Only 1 in 3 adults believe children when they disclose child sexual abuse to them.
Mm,
When we've got only, a child has to go and speak to at least 3 adults before someone will listen to them.
yeah.
Hopefully they get it on the first go. But if they don't, that could, like in your case, could make it last longer than it needs to go on for. And, yeah, it just baffles my mind. But like you said, that empathy you feel for your grandparent is because they didn't talk about it. They didn't have,
Mm,
like, no one said, this is what we do. This is how we fix this. This is how we get help. And also, I think, it was her child. So she was probably feeling like she had some sort of responsibility there too.
yeah. And we've spoken about it, and she told me there was a lot of guilt for so many reasons, for not responding the way she should have, for not she believed me, I'll say that,
Yeah, right.
but she
That's good.
didn't know how to respond. Yeah. Um
Yeah.
so yeah, it was, yeah,
I'd
an
imagine there's a
interesting
lot of people
situation.
out there. Yeah, it is
Yeah.
very interesting. I'd imagine there's a lot of people out there that wish they had have done something or have been felt powerless to try and to help and to do anything, especially in these intrafamilial situations.
Yeah.
It's someone close to the family. They might be the caregiver or they might be they might be the financial, like they financially support everyone. And if you report it, that financial support's taken away. That person's support is
Mm,
taken away. I know that has been the case in some of the cases I've dealt with, that it's the father, and the father is the main, he makes all the money, he goes to work, and
mm.
he's the one earning, and then everyone's out of a home and everyone's, so there is so many complexities to this, but at the end of the day your safety was more important.
Yeah, and my situation, my parents were separated, and I wasn't with my birth mother. I was with my stepmother, so she had married my father. And they'd been separated, and so I think it was probably easier for her to accept in that situation. I don't know how it would have looked if they were still together. Maybe it would have been different.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, so I do often wonder how that might have looked different if they were still in a relationship.
Yeah, right. And so with the times that you would go and see your dad, was that like weekend visits and stuff like that?
Yeah, yeah. So weekend visits.
And so your stepmom was your primary carer outside of your dad, is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So
Okay,
I
yeah, so
stayed with her when
pretty
they
interesting
separated.
situation, hey?
Yeah. That's not even the best part because I did last year have a DNA discovery where it determined
What?
that the person I thought was my dad actually isn't my biological dad. So that's a whole nother
Whoa,
situation.
blown it out of
So
the water.
yeah. So that person who is my perpetrator, who I believe to be my father, is actually not my biological dad, which I only discovered last year. And that I will say has been incredibly healing,
I
far
bet.
more than I had
Because
have
then,
ever imagined.
because then now you're like, well, he wasn't my dad. I'd imagine there's so many complexities to and levels to
So
this, but
many, so many. Yeah.
so
So,
the support you got outside of that. So when you did finally disclose to your stepmother and she obviously reported it and stuff like that, and you didn't have to go back. So what kind of support did you get after that, and what helped you the most?
mm, I mean, the first step, once I told my stepmom what had happened, her immediate thought was to call the police. That's what she did straight away, which was, in my opinion, probably the best option to have gone with. She called down as well. That the rest of it all happened very quickly, where we had to do physical examinations with the interviews with the police and all of those things as well, which was no fun whatsoever.
No, no,
And
definitely not.
it is, yeah, that in itself is a trauma going through that experience, especially when when you're the only person speaking against one person, there's not really any physical evidence or corroborating stories
Yeah.
to help.
Yep.
So, following that though, had therapy. So I did a lot of CBT. I did some group stuff. I wasn't really a fan of that, but a lot of one-to-one. So I'd go to counseling sessions on a sort of weekly and fortnightly basis for a number of years, probably, just to help sort of reframe some of my thinking around what's happened and
Yeah.
helping with accepting and normalizing, my feelings and thoughts after the
Yep.
fact as well.
Yep.
Yeah. So
It sounds like you
the
found a good
therapy was helpful.
therapist then.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell you who they were because I do not remember that far back anymore. But
Yeah, yeah.
it obviously was very helpful.
The right people.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Like we can, and sadly, a lot of people don't access therapy after, disclosure and stuff like that. It's getting better, but it's still, and, not everyone is, and I don't know your further experience in this, but or your opinion, but not every therapist or counselor or psychologist is equipped with the tools to be able to, help
yeah,
someone who has been
mm-hmm,
sexually abused or dealt with any kind of abuse like that. So it can be
yeah,
quite a challenge to find the right people, but the right people will make you feel safe, will make you feel seen and heard. And it sounds like you had
yeah,
that.
absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. Even as an adult, I've had certain periods over my life where I have the benefit of I'm very insightful into how I'm feeling. And that's probably because of those early therapy days where it's given me these tools. So when I had situations arise, like when I had my first child, when I was pregnant, I preemptively engaged a psychologist who was experienced. And I have very specific criteria because I also have worked in mental health with a lot of professionals. So I know for me, I need it to be someone that is very highly experienced and, they need to have a certain level of qualification and knowledge, which makes it a bit challenging sometimes. But I preemptively arranged therapy. So, like the situation that happened last year with this person in our life, immediately, the day I found out that this person was being charged with these offences, booked in with my GP. I took time off work because I knew that I was going to need to process it because
Mm.
of my own experience. And at that point, it was a little up in the air about the nature of, the
Mm-hmm.
offences and how significant they were. So I checked in with the GP immediately, got a mental health care plan. They prioritised me as well, which was really good. And I got straight onto it,
Yeah.
which was just so, so helpful, just so I had an outlet to be able to, let it all out and go, this is what's happening and this is how I feel about it all and just helping to process. I think that's a really helpful tool to have for
Yeah.
me now is being able to notice when I'm probably going to, whether I need it or not,
Yeah.
just to have someone else, there
Yep.
is really huge.
Yeah, and you said, well, not only in that instance, but you knew that you needed to process some stuff about becoming a parent because,
Mm,
obviously your abuser was a parent in your life at the time, and so it's
yeah.
kind of like that. What a great realization that, okay, this is going to be tricky to navigate. I need support
Mm,
here, and to just go and do it, because a lot of us wait till we're in crisis point and then we're
yeah.
seeking help.
Yeah, yeah. I was so much more scared than I needed to be in hindsight. Like I did cope much better with parenthood than I thought, and my fears went, probably a little over the top, but at least I was seeking help. And I'd prepared my partner. I said, this is what you need to look out for. This is, my concerns, so that he knew if I wasn't seeing it, that he could
He might
maybe
be able to
pinpoint it
point you
as
in
well.
the Yeah, that's so smart.
Yeah. It didn't come to
That's
fruition, so I'm
healthy.
really happy. I was just putting all these little things in place to make sure.
Well, you had a
Yeah, so
plan. You had an action plan.
yeah. And I would recommend that to anyone, to be honest. It was the best thing. Like, it might have seemed over the top at the time, but I think having that insight about the possibility of how I might experience childbirth and parenthood in itself is protective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a protective factor. So I guess post your abuse, growing up, having support, coming to grips with what happened, becoming a parent, what kind of things did you put in place between parenthood and then obviously this person who's in your life that
Mm,
you're like, that's kind of giving me the, my gut feelings are going off, my intuition's
mm,
going off, or whatever you were feeling at the time. Did you put anything in place in between? Because one of the things that I hear from parents who are victim survivors is that they struggle with how, I feel like I'm over the top, or I've, taking it to the nth degree. People think I'm
mm,
overreacting. People think I'm being too much. And I personally always say you can never be too protective, because there is so many factors in your world. It was obviously a family member.
mm,
But, personally, I'm like, whatever you need to do to make yourself feel better. But obviously, let's get some supports and like have a plan in place, because that's how we're going to mitigate, those feelings of like, I feel like I won't have control. Something's going to happen. Obviously,
mm.
you did that really well. So what did you do with your own children that might have helped you or might have alleviated some of your own anxiety around it?
I think the very first place it started, and it's definitely evolved over the years as I've grown and learned myself, is at a very bare minimum, I taught my children anatomically correct names for their parts. And that was because I remember very vividly the questioning that I had to answer as well. And it was, what is the name of these things? You can't give me like, pet names. It has to be a name of the actual anatomically correct body part.
Private parts,
So
yeah.
and people found that really uncomfortable because I would
Mm,
be openly saying, no, it's a penis, it's this,
yes.
it's that. And they're looking at me going, no, it's a willy. That's so rude. And I'm like, no, this is not what we need to teach them. This is what it
Mm,
is. It's their body part. We all call it this. This is what it is.
yes.
um,
This
so it was
is the
challenging.
actual term.
Yeah, it was. I found it odd that people found it so uncomfortable.
Yes.
So that was where it started, I guess. I had a lot of books on, my body, my rules, and different types of, just teaching about their own body autonomy and safety. And when they're little, it was just very subtle little things,
Mm,
just in general
mm,
conversation. And then as they got older, and especially into school ages, and then again now, my child who's 8, who's just got himself a watch that he can talk to his friends and call us, because we've moved up to a remote town and it's kind of necessary up here. So we've had to have those conversations again about not taking photos of, if someone asks for photos of you, we don't take photos and send it to our
mm.
friends. That's not something we need to be doing. Having conversations frequently about what is and isn't normal of people when they're asking.
Inappropriate behavior.
Yeah, yeah. So I it was I did my own research as well around
Mm,
protective behaviors, and I'm very grateful that my kids' schools have always been very proactive. So that it's been
yep.
taught since even in our daycares
Yep.
right through. So that has been helpful, and we've just expanded on that as well.
Yep.
Sleepovers were rare. My kids both are very, very attached anyway, so
Yeah.
they prefer to be with us. However, on the odd occasion, if it was a sleepover, it's been with a family member who we've had a lot of trust in.
Mm-hmm.
I like to trust my instinct with a person as well. And if I don't, I will get a vibe. And if I get a vibe, then that's it. I'm just not willing to even test the boundary.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important and something I often, that's one of the parts that make me go, stop overreacting. You're being silly. You're looking at things that might not be there. And that is ultimately the thing that's been what's protected my kids with this situation that arose recently as well, was just that gut feeling that I just don't want to risk it.
Were they doing anything in particular, this person?
In the beginning, not so much, but there was a backstory. There was some behavior that had happened in their childhood that
Mm-hmm.
at the time wasn't appropriate. And, the family had dealt with it as best they felt they could at the time. So I had that in the back of my mind. And although I wanted to believe that this person was recovered and it was just a situation from their own trauma background, all the things I tried to tell myself were, I'm probably overreacting, but
Mm,
I stuck with it. So as the kids started to get a bit older, and I guess he started to get a little bit more involved in our lives and was asking, just little suggestions like they can come and stay here with us if you want. And
mm,
that was a never. That was absolutely not. I wouldn't. This is where I feel like I probably went a little bit extreme as well. It's not extreme. I say extreme because that's how I felt at the time, but it is not. And I'm very grateful for this. I wouldn't change a child's nappy in front of him. I wouldn't let a child get dressed in front of him. I would not let him sleep in the same house. Or we had him sleep at our house on one occasion for an event, and my children were in my bed with
mm-hmm.
me that night, just in case. And I would talk to other people in my life as well about putting in boundaries for their own children because I was worried about that side of things as
Mm,
well. So I had a lot of worry that it could happen to other people if they weren't aware, but I
mm.
also didn't want to
What a difficult
breach.
situation.
Yeah. But I also felt like I might have been breaching this person's confidentiality and privacy, and like life is different. Who knows?
But
But
at
behaviors,
the end of the day, it was founded, wasn't it?
it was, and it was a big relief for me to know that I'd put in the right measures for the kids. Huge, huge relief. So
Yeah.
yeah, but there was definitely some things, some key flags that I noticed towards the last sort of couple of years, I suppose, that really made me go harder on the protective
Mm-hmm.
measures, I suppose. And there was an occasion where he'd asked one of the children that were with if they needed to go to the toilet unprompted. And I
Mm,
heard this and immediately stepped in and said, no, it's fine. If she needs to go, she can ask me, and her mum will take her.
mm,
There was quite a lot of pushing of having sleepovers with other children in the family as well. Like they can
mm.
come and stay with us. He lived in another town, so it was like a little bit of a road trip if you went out to see him. So it was like, hey, the kids can come and stay here for the weekend and things like that, which I
Yeah,
just
weird.
didn't feel comfortable with.
And why the kids? Not
Yeah.
why not the whole family?
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
why are you and like, yeah, I can see where your spidey senses were probably going off because, if
hmm
you live in another town and you're offering to take the kids for the weekend, why the kids are not like, hey, everyone come out and stay. We love to see you all.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I will say that that behavior wasn't the same for me as it was for someone else in my life that was close, whose children unfortunately were impacted by this. And that person did not feel able to put in the boundaries. And I'll say she did put in boundaries, but probably just not quite enough because I guess she didn't have the background insight that I had as well. There's so many reasons, so many things she
Confidence.
was going through. Fear, she felt like me. I'm being over the top. So,
Mm.
I can't judge him for this. I don't know what the situation really is. But
What I
his
find with a lot
response
of
to her,
parents, sorry, what I find with a lot of parents is that lack of confidence, lack of knowledge, lack of awareness, lack of feeling like it's there, that it's okay if you say no to someone. Like
yeah,
that I have to say yes because they're making me. And because people like this person can be quite forceful. especially if
Mm,
it's like blood in the water of a shark, right? So they know that you're a little
yeah.
bit scared to say no, or that you might not feel like you can say no to them. So they just keep
Mm.
pushing.
And
So
yeah,
sorry,
look, I will
I cut you
say,
off there. So what did they do to that person?
so I would say that the other person was a little bit more vulnerable than me in many ways. So I do think that that played a part because my children were never asked to go on sleepovers without me. Yes, we were asked to go to hang out with them as a family, but never in that individual situation. Whereas with the other person, there was much more pushing. It'll take a load off if I help you with the kids for the weekend because she was having a rough time. So it was definitely targeted, I guess, as there was definitely a lot of intentional behavior happening there that was trying to make her feel safe and comfortable that, I'm here to help you. I want to make life easier for you, which didn't happen with me. And I think that is because of the differences in, I guess, she was in a much more vulnerable state at that time in comparison to me, who has done a lot of work on this subject, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and they do. They're really, they can be, and it doesn't matter who it is in your relationships, your lives. They can be very intentional with who they target.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
And so when they finally were, obviously, and it's tragic, hey, like you obviously know that everyone involved in this situation. So it's so tragic that this person who, none of these children deserve any of this. And
Mm,
it's so tragic when this stuff happens. And, yes, it gives you that little bit of a, yes, I was right kind of thing. But then you're like, oh, I was right.
yeah. Yeah. It's a really shitty feeling, to say the least. There's this little bit of a confidence boost in me going, I've done the right thing. And this has really enforced my decisions moving forward on how I'm going to continue to approach things and to trust my instincts. Like, I just think that trusting my instincts is what has helped us, especially in this situation, and not giving in to them because I think I'm being over the top. But I had huge amount of guilt because I felt, and I know, and this is again because I've done a lot of work on these things, but I felt so much guilt that this had happened to other children. But I felt like I had done my best to try and put in enough measures without overstepping into someone else's parenting journey because it's not mine, it's theirs, which is it's a tough line to, sit on. I'm not the parent, so
It's
I can
so
only do so
difficult.
much.
I know it's so
Yeah.
difficult. I've been there, like as a parent myself, like as a
Mm,
parent, as a detective, as a just an individual who sees something and says something, but then also like I cannot control what anyone else does. I can't
no.
force anyone to do anything, and so it's such a difficult situation to be in when it comes to this stuff because, like you said, you said something, you made some comments, you did all you could in that situation, bar going and camping out with those kids when they were there or wherever they were. And,
Yeah.
you even stepped in about the toileting, going to the toilet, which is that, and that's purely based off of your gut feelings. So for parents who are
Mm.
listening and maybe have some fears or maybe their spidey senses are going off or they're seeing red flags, what kind of things I mean, you've already mentioned quite a few, but like what do you suggest for them?
I think trusting your instinct is just the first and foremost. Like, if there is something there, there's probably a reason why you're feeling that way. Trust it and go and seek some help, or look, or go and, I guess, get educated on the signs. Like in your case, I've read a lot of your resources, which is really helpful, and I'm frequently sending it to my friends to say, "Hey, check this out.
Thank
This
you.
is free. Look at this." But there is so much power in knowledge, and I think as parents, we have a responsibility to know this information and know how to protect our children. So trust your instincts, get educated, seek out extra help. If you aren't sure and you're like, "No, I'm being over the top," then find someone to talk to about it so you can have someone else's input,
Yeah.
preferably a professional or someone who would have some understanding of the situation rather than, a family or a friend. Um, yeah, bring it up. Bring it up with people. Have a
Talk to people.
discussion.
Yeah, have those
Yeah.
discussions. Hey, and I always say, you don't have to go, like, I even had this conversation this morning with someone else. You don't have to go, hey, I think this person's a sex offender.
Mm.
But you could say something like, have you noticed that they spend a lot of time behind closed doors with the kids? Like, that's a bit weird for me. I don't really
Mm.
like that. Have you ever noticed that they are wanting to take the kids to the toilet all the time? I mean, like, it's really helpful, but the kids aren't wanting to go to the toilet.
Yeah.
Like you can
Yeah.
do it subtly like that, or you could do it like, I don't think it's appropriate for them to offer to go to the toilet all the time. Like, if the kids need to
Mm.
go to the toilet, they're at an age they can go. I'm going to speak up. And,
Yeah.
do you think you can support me in talking about this with them? Or can you keep an eye on the next time this happens and
Yeah.
maybe step in, because I don't want them to, look, I don't know why I feel this way, but this is why I feel this way, like,
Yeah.
you've got the history behind you. But I think the thing is that we see things or we feel things, and I'll hear it from parents all the time. I heard it all the time when I was interviewing kids. Oh, I didn't know how to say anything, so I'm so pissed off at myself for not saying something. Or I had a feeling they were like that, but I just didn't, there was no evidence. I didn't know what to do. Well,
Yeah.
get in between them and children that they have access to, because that's really the most important thing you could do.
Yeah, and potentially the only thing, because you can't just go, call the police and say, I think this person is this. What evidence do you have? Oh, I just have a feeling. It doesn't work that way,
No,
sadly.
no, it does not.
Which, would be nice. But yeah, and I think what this really highlighted for me, this situation that probably I wasn't as strict on before, and I've always been someone who likes to share fairly openly on social media. My kids sometimes were involved in that, but not hugely. It was more so about me. But this situation brought to light that there was a lot of online content in this as well. A lot of photos, a lot of videos. Some of the videos that were described as being very normal. Something that most parents would just see as, I'm taking a normal photo of a child, but maybe they're wearing a nappy, or maybe they're getting changed to go for a swim, like fairly mundane day-to-day things that were then used for inappropriate purposes, harmful
So
purposes.
what you're
So
saying is that this person was collecting photos of kids basically on their computer
yeah,
or on their
alongside
devices.
so that, alongside the other offences, there was a lot of online content that they were curating
Yeah, right.
from seemingly everyday photos.
Yeah.
So that
And
really made me,
I hate that I'm even like celebrating you saying this, but I've been
yeah,
banging on about this for so long, Danielle, and
hmm
honestly, no one listens to me. No, they do.
it's
Some
really
parents do.
terrifying.
I know. And
Yeah,
I had the same, like I used to see it before even AI was a thing, right? But
yeah,
you know, I've been out of the job 5 years, but when I was in the police, I was seeing, the same things. When you arrest someone who's under suspicion of being a sex offender, a child sex offender, we generally check their computers, and you would check their computers, and all of those things that you said, the photos of your kids getting changed, the photos of your kids in their bathing suit, the photos of their kids in their nappy, in the bath, or even seemingly normal photos of your kids just looking pretty or handsome or good, whatever
yeah,
they just collect them and they use them for their own nefarious reasons or their own reasons, because that's what they do. And parents are inadvertently sharing normal photos every day thinking, why
mm,
would anyone find this arousing?
yeah,
But
exactly.
it's we don't live in their world. We don't have their their illness or whatever you want to call it, their sickness, or but they do. They find that stuff arousing.
Yeah, and what's really terrifying about it, that the detective was really, really highlighted for us, is that these photos, they can delete the originals, but they've already been distributed. There is no way to get this. This is there, who knows where, what country, who's got access to these photos for the rest of their life. There's no way to go back. And that's a really hard reality to face, to know that these photos are out there of your children.
So you've changed that since then, like since you found all of this
Yep.
out. What have you changed and
Yeah.
what have you implemented in your family?
So they are definitely not shared on any of my private social media. Sometimes I might have a brief conversation about them. There might be a video from the back there. Yeah. Am more steering towards not sharing anything. I'm even a little bit more cautious on my own private social media, on my Facebook, which is all very private, only family and friends that I know. However, this person was on there. So
Yeah. So you
that
can't
doesn't
control
make that
that, hey?
any safer. Yeah.
You can't control what someone else is going to do or how they're going to look at that photo or that video.
Yeah.
So you're saying they're not on anything public, but they might be very sparingly put on your private stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, and I still go back and flick through because I did have them on my public social medias at various points. So I have deleted a lot of that off my page now, and I do little check-ins every now
Yeah.
and then just to see, because, I
Yeah.
do have blinkers on sometimes. My first run, I'll, go, that's okay, I'll just leave that. And even my private page, my private Facebook, it's, they have to be fully clothed. I'm very mindful of the type of content that is shared on there. I am tending to not share much on there these days anyway, because I just think saves me any heartache, to be honest. Occasionally I'll, maybe share it privately to my close family who are back home in Perth, where I'm
Yep.
up here
Yep.
in the Pilbara. So, I'm
Yeah.
more inclined to send it to them directly
Yeah. And that's a lot
rather
safer.
than,
I mean, you can't
yeah.
you never know what anyone's going to do, but that's a lot of it. That would be my advice to parents, is that just really consider that anything we put out there, we don't have any control once it leaves our device. We do not know
Mm,
what anyone, even family members, close friends, we don't know what anyone wants to do with these images. And once upon a time, we had the family photo album that we pulled out
mm-hmm,
once in a blue moon, and we showed friends and we showed family. Now everything we do is just in everyone's faces, and it kind of loses its importance and value. So we just think, well, that's something important. My daughter is, as everyone knows, is almost finished school. She's going to be an adult next year, and it's been like this for quite some time now, but I will ask her, is it okay if I take a photo? Is it okay if are you okay if I share this photo to my private page? I never share anything with her in public, but is it okay if I share this with my followers, my private Facebook? And sometimes she'll look at it and she'll go, "No, actually, I don't want you to. No, I don't want you to take a photo." And it's my job as a parent to is to respect her wishes. And
yeah,
it's so funny because I've given her that autonomy, and and like you said at the very beginning, teaching your kids bodily autonomy also includes keep teaching them autonomy of when they want to be included in online stuff as well. So
yeah,
I think that's that's a good point for parents and for people. And I know that it sounds, I guess, we went from sharing nothing to sharing everything to now having to go back to
mm,
sharing like very sparingly, because the world has evolved so much and we didn't know what we were doing when we were first on social media.
yeah, yeah.
It's crazy.
It is crazy. It's a scary place, that's for sure. There is lots of things we can do to make it less scary.
Mm,
And, my experience is like I've got a very first-hand experience, but I feel like I'm still optimistic that, we can have a good life and I can keep my children from harm and give them enough independence to still be kids and have some freedoms.
yeah.
It was a big part of why we moved to the Pilbara and to a small town as well. It was, we get a lot more of that up here as well, which is really nice. So, yeah, you can still, it's not all bad news, I guess. It
Yeah.
feels
It feels like it, but it's
scary
not.
and overwhelming, like you're restricting everything, but you're really not. I
Mm,
just think your child safety is first and foremost. And just because you haven't personally experienced it or seen it doesn't mean it's not happening. And we
mm.
need to always have that in the back of our mind, because it's far more common than
Oh,
people would ever
I
want
did.
to believe.
I was driving. My husband still. I've lived in the Pilbara. I grew up in the Pilbara, and I was driving my husband to the airport this morning at 5 o'clock in the morning because he flies out to the Pilbara, and I was driving him there, and I'm like half asleep, and I'm like, 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys. That's 2 out of 8 children. That's 1 out of 4. Like I was doing the fractions in my 5 o'clock
Yeah.
this morning. It's 1 in 4
Yep.
children will be sexually abused before they reach 18.
Yeah.
And you literally just have to start. And this is my experience. I'm not sure about you, Danielle, because obviously you share about your experiences. And this is what I love about what I do, is that it's giving people a voice. The minute we speak up and we're openly sharing with compassion and empathy for everyone, then it gives permission for other people to share. And so when I share
Mm.
about what I did, what I do now, I always get disclosures. I always get people telling me that they were abused. And more often than not, I can go into a party, into a room, and they find out what I do, and I will get told a handful of people will tell me that they were sexually abused as children. And,
Yeah.
that's it's an honor for them to trust me with that information, but it's also really scary and sad that people, a lot of people have been sexually abused and probably have never told anyone or haven't felt safe to talk about it. So the conversation we've had today is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think if people can feel a little less alone in what they're going through or what they've been through, they're more likely to speak up and get help. And yeah, it's really important.
So important. And I find that for women, we find it a little bit easier, but there's so many men who've been victims of sexual abuse and they
Yeah.
go years and years and years without telling anyone. It affects their whole life. They become, substance. There's substance abuse, domestic
Hmm.
violence. There's like anger and shame and all of these things that like limit your lifetime and your
Yeah.
joy in your life. And just by having some, going and talking to a therapist, getting some help, sharing with your family and being open and honest, it could take all of that weight off your shoulders and make it such a beautiful, not a beautiful experience, but you could have such less burden in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I've certainly seen that firsthand working in the mental health space as well, the impacts of, people who have been abused in childhood and they've come through the mental health system in an inpatient capacity. So it's very obvious
Mm,
to me in that space, but maybe not so much to those who maybe don't see it every day.
yeah. So the couple of things that I've taken from this little conversation, not little conversation, this conversation, is teach your children about the correct terminology and their anatomical terms. Use them in your family because they are really important. First of all, because they help a child if they need to disclose, but they also help protect a child because if a child knows what everything is, then they can't be, and that it's theirs and it's, their body safety rights, then no one can do anything. Like, not no one can do anything, but it will reduce the amount of things and hopefully reduce the length of harm if something happens. The second thing you said was get therapy. No, you didn't. You just
Yes.
said just seek help in some way, shape, or
Yeah.
form, and know that it's helpful. The other things that you said was don't share kids' photos if you can help it, or be very mindful about sharing kids' photos, and trust your
Mm,
gut. That was the big one.
trust your gut. Yeah, especially.
Anything
Yeah.
else to add?
Look, not really. I think we covered a lot. That definitely summarizes everything. And it's still an area that I'm learning and growing in as well. So I don't get it right all the time, but that's okay. I think we do the best we can with what we know.
Mm,
My goal is always to educate myself further so that I can do better. Doesn't mean that it wasn't good before. It's just now I've learned
we
differently
can
and
do
I will
better.
do accordingly. So,
Yeah.
um,
And that's
I think
parenting
that's
in a
important.
nutshell, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I learned so much. My daughter's been the biggest teacher for me because everything I thought I knew nothing. And then, and just being open to exploring that we might not know it all, but once we do know better, we can do better. And that's exactly like why we're having this conversation, because I'm sure there's mums and dads and people who are listening out there that, they're going to hear you say, like, I felt something, I put some protective boundaries in place and some factors in place. And actually I was right. And,
Yeah.
so we might never know if we're right or wrong, but it's not worth the risk.
It is not. And although at the time, when I talk about it and say it out loud, it sounds like I put in these really crazy things. But at the time, it was much more subtle. I didn't
Mm,
have to be so obvious about it. I was discreetly doing these things. No one would have had a clue that I
yeah.
was discreetly taking a child off to change them. Or, it was all very subtle, the things that I was doing. It just felt really big to me.
Extreme. It felt extreme and over the top because you were doing something that you knew only you really had that feeling. Like everyone else was probably around this person or around going, "Oh, what," and they didn't seem like they were seeing what you were seeing because you had those extra feelings. You've got your radars turned to maximum, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for chatting. And I've got a lot out of this. You've just proven, like, not proven, but I know a lot of parents struggle with this conversation, especially if they're victim survivors themselves, because people who don't understand will make them feel bad and they will make them
Yeah.
feel like they are being extreme and over the top. And I think one of the other things that you pointed out is having an action plan for a lot of this stuff and knowing what you're going to do if something, doesn't feel right. That can just alleviate some of that stress and that feeling
Yeah.
like you're not being like that you may be being over the top or too extreme. And that might
Mm,
just be the answer, like coming up with a little system or a little idea on how to make that work for you. That might be the
Yeah.
one thing that helps some of the parents listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thanks. Have a good rest of your day, Danielle.
Thank you. I will do.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Education empowers children, strengthens parents, and most importantly, prevents abuse. That's why I do this work, and that's why you're here. So truly, thank you. If you'd like more support or resources, follow me on social media under Kristi McVie or Cape-AU, where you'll find all the links in the show notes. You can also grab a copy of my book, Operation KidSafe, A Detective's Guide to Child Abuse Prevention at www.cape-au.com, where you'll find further resources and self-paced courses to help you in this journey of protecting your kids. If you found this episode valuable, please take a moment to leave a review or share it with someone important. Your support helps more parents and caregivers discover this important information and take action to keep kids safe. Check the show notes for extra links and support, and most importantly, thank you for showing up and taking action to protect your kids. See you next time.